He's saying, before we start, let's get organized a little bit better. So, if you like to sit on a cushion, you can sit down closer. He doesn't want to get a bad neck, so just come a little bit more central. You can use also those seats with the cushions. There was one of my teachers in India. Yeah, if we were all seated far, he would say, I don't bite. Okay, just don't sit in front of the camera. Better like this. So we're going to start with a short prayer, which I do always at the beginning, where we're going to ask blessings from my masters, and the masters are my masters. It's to generate gratitude. If I have something to teach you, it's because I have been taught. Om Aguru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasane Karma Tavardanya Shri Bhadra Varsamanya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Aguru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasane Karma Tavardanya Shri Bhadra Varsamanya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasane Karma Tavardanya Shri Bhadra Vasamanya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasane Karma Uttavardanya Shri Bhadra Varsamanya Sarva Siddhi Hum Om Guru Vajradhara Sumati Muni Shasane Karma Uttavardanya Shri Bhadra Varsamanya Sarva Siddhi. Lama Michel Rinpoche
Yadreve Nampata Chala Chitsulame Tucherapone Kudan Sungi Nawakame Tu Sunyume Kesanto Parasho Keva Kundu Yabala Mata Dreme Chiki Bella Luchuchi Sada Langi Oterapsone Dolce Changi Gopar Nyurto Shum Kyuke Kudanda Gielu Pakyuke Sundanda Giena Pakyuke Tutanda Gi Venyerme Chitu Jingielu Makyuke Kudanda Gielu Makyuke Sundanda Giena Makyuke Tudanda Gi Tenyerme Chitu Jingiolo. Shakya Amunye Soha Om Muni Muni Mahamuni Shakya Nagi chisunge bet sonamgi drola penche sange tu parashu sange chodan sugi chanamla chanchu bardu dani kyapsuchi Dagi chisunge bet sonamgi drola penche sange tu parashu sange chodan sugi chanamla Chancho partu tani kyapsuchi Dagi chisungi pet sonamgi Drola penchir sange tu parasho. In the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, I take refuge until enlightenment. With the practice of generosity and the other perfections, may I obtain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. Good morning. First of all, I'm really happy to be together here in this. This reminds me a little bit of when Lama Michel Rinpoche would say we need to make our holidays holy days. We need to transform our vacation time, our holidays into holy days. Because in our daily lives, because we dedicate a lot of our time to just survival. We get a lot of time to work, our house, our family, our daily lives, of getting our objects of desire, trying to avoid the things that we don't like. And we're quite taken in our daily lives. So it becomes really important to dedicate time, to dedicate space to that which goes beyond our survival. Find time to do things that are going to help us not just live better, but also make our life more meaningful. So what happens is it becomes really important to dedicate time, this time together. And I wanted to divide these 3 days that we have together in 3 main points. First of all, originally I tried to divide the day. So there's a theoretical part, and then some practice together, even doing brief sessions, especially at the beginning. One shouldn't do long sessions because then you don't want to do it again. And then I tried to insert for tomorrow and the day after tomorrow, after the morning session, some time where we could be together in nature and to walk in the woods, because we'll talk about this, but that is important too. But for the theoretical part, I wanted to divide it into 2 parts, which are, the first is, like, why should we meditate? That's connected naturally to the second point, which is what is meditation? That connects to the third point, like how to meditate. How do we meditate? In reality, I mean, just to know how to meditate without wanting to meditate is quite useless. So one of the most important points is because learning how to meditate is the easiest. The most important part is having passion for meditation. It is wanting to do it. Because in everything in life, if we don't have passion towards something, it will be difficult for us to put energy into it. Maybe we do it a little bit, but then we get tired of it. Or if we're tired, we don't do it. If we're distracted, there's one thing or another. And if we don't have this passion, if we don't have this desire for it, if we don't see its importance, it'll be difficult for us to put energy into it. And it's what I've seen with many people, with regard to meditation, is like the missing point is not that they don't know how to meditate, because in reality, how to meditate is really the easiest part. Of course, there are deeper aspects and there are different types of meditations, etc. But the starting point, which is, where most of us are, where we should put energy, it's just very simple. But simple doesn't necessarily mean easy, because it requires constancy. So the first thing and the most important thing is to ask ourselves why. Also because what happens is, in our lifetime, our time is limited. And time is, at the end of the day, the most important resource that we have. It's our life itself. What's our life made up of? Our life is made up of moments. It's made up of experiences, of meetings, etc., emotions. But it's made up of these moments that we live. In other words, it's made up of time. Oh no, we can explain what time is, but the point is here. I mean, how do we use our life? And this is a very important point. If we choose to use our life for meditation, or a part of our life, even an hour a day, that means that I'm using up a part of my life for that thing. There needs to be a reason behind it. We need to understand a little bit this why. Very often we're in a hurry to get to the point. Right away we want to have we want to have learned. We want to be expert meditators, or maybe we want to already be at the end. But in reality, you can't. You can only start from the beginning. When if you try to start from the end, you'll just always be stopped, and we never really start. It's, when someone's like daydreaming, I should do this, I should do that, and so many projects, so many dreams, and then they're never begun because that first step is never taken, because one is taken by the arrival. And when instead the first steps are the most important. It's like saying, if I want to learn a language, I need to start with the very fewest words and gradually become expert in that language. So let's start from the beginning. And at the beginning, there's a strength that guides us, that pushes us to do everything that we do in our lives. And this force, this energy, is desire. In reality, we do things that we don't want to do. Maybe conceptually, maybe we say we don't want to do that thing, but everything we do is because at the end of the day we think that it's better to do it. Even if there are things that we could say, okay, if it depended only on me, I wouldn't do it. But when does life depend only, since when does life depend only on us? So at the end of the day, we do what we think is best to do. And if there's something we don't want to do, we just don't do it. Obviously, there are conflicts where, okay, I don't like doing this, but the others need it, or, if I don't do it, there will be consequences, so I do it. This means that in the evaluation of what should be done, I do it. I don't know if that's clear. So this strength of desire, this strength that guides us towards something, pushes us towards something, is something that should be cultivated and directed. Let's remember that desire is not something that should be abandoned or eliminated. Desire is this strength that pushes us towards something. In some cases, it's translated as aspiration. We need to generate a strength towards something. Normally our desires are of two types. They're desires that go towards something that is beneficial for us, or towards avoiding something that is negative. So our desires, if we see, they go towards pleasures or avoiding suffering. These are the two directions. These are the two directions where our desires are directed. So we need to direct this energy, direct this desire. And an important thing is to understand, first and foremost, where we are, what situation we are in this present moment. So let's try to make a photo of this present moment. It's obvious. I don't know the life, intimate life of each one of you. I don't know the details of each one of you, what you do, or your inner states of being. But at the same time, what happens is that we're very, very similar in many, many aspects. So now I'm going to explain things just generalizing. I mean, some things are very similar, but maybe something has something that's a little bit different, but we are quite similar in our life. I see it in the following way. We're fine when there's a balance, when we have that inner feeling of that sense that everything's fine, where we don't feel we're not on the attack, we're not feeling defensive, we're just balanced and fine. And to get to this state of balance, that there are three fundamental points. We can imagine it as like an object that's actually weighed on a scale. So on one end there's the environment, our surroundings, this context in which we find ourselves, the people with whom we interact, the actual environment, hot, cold, is the economic, material situation, our working situation, social context, the familial context, everything around me. This is all part of our surroundings, including also the behavior of others. That's one end. If we were to ask ourselves, how influenced are we by this context in which we find ourselves? This a lot. Sometimes you just need one word from someone and our mind changes, or a news, an article of news that we read, or if it's too hot or it's too cold. I mean, small things or big things, just a little change around us is enough to influence us greatly. So we are influenced by our surroundings. So I'm not saying differently. And then we can deepen this. But of course, so we are influenced. I'm not saying that the surroundings are not important. If our surroundings were not important, then the spiritual practitioners wouldn't try to go to the mountains. They wouldn't have created monasteries that are far from the cities. There wouldn't be pilgrimages. I mean, there wouldn't be these external circumstances and contexts to help us. If it wasn't important. There's actually a Tibetan saying that says, when you pray and you have no results, when you meditate and you have no result, when you study and you have no result, basically when you do everything that you can and you have no results, take a pilgrimage. Pilgrimages, I believe a lot in them. When we go to a holy place with a certain intention, this has a particular power. Shows us that, again, that our surroundings are very important. So on one side we have our surroundings, on the other side we have our body. How important is our physical state of being for our inner balance? A lot. Just a little bit of pain or a hormonal imbalance, just a little bit, and then our emotional state really changes. I'm convinced that in reality our inner state is much more influenced by our body than what we can imagine. This reminds me of something. once I heard a doctor who was speaking during a conference, and he was explaining the the reality of all the microorganisms in our gut. Just imagine in our body, there's it's a frightening amount of organisms in our body. I mean, there are more beings inside our body than on the planet Earth, and it was quite perplexed. So they say that on average, like 40 40 kilograms on average would be per person would be just microorganisms. So they did many studies to show the influence of these microorganisms on the balance of the person's body and on the person. Buddhist texts talk about the body and mind being strongly connected as if they were two manifestations of the same thing. So in reality, we separate our body and mind, you know, but you can't. But there's nothing that happens in the body that doesn't have an effect on the mind, and vice versa. I see the body and mind like two doors that go to the same room. They can't not influence each other. So, 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 but there was one of these studies made me reflect on something. They took these two little laboratory mice that they're genetically identical, and they raised them. They saw that and some were more calm and some were more nervous, and so they had different characters, let's say personalities, and then they separated these two groups of nervous mice and calm mice, and they took the the microorganisms of the gut from the nervous ones, put them in the calm ones, and the calm ones became nervous, and vice versa. The same thing happened when they did the opposite. So I say, let's forget meditation. Let's just do a transplant of the microorganisms in our gut. But the point is that the body influences the mind strongly. And the other day I was talking with doctors who were specialized in the microorganisms of the body. They say, yes, is that right? In ancient Tibet, taking a blessing from a master, to take blessings from a master, one would actually even eat his excrement, But at the time, so I said this to these doctors, and they were saying, well, maybe not wrong at all, if that has an influence on the mind. There are actually transplants of excrement, because it has a tremendous influence on our mind and our balance. So all of this to say that our body has a strong influence over our mind. I mean, try to meditate if you're in a lot of pain or have a lot of suffering. Even hormonal imbalances influences tremendously our well-being. I think we've all had experiences like this, from childhood to adolescence, throughout our lives. So in this balance, so on one side we have surroundings, on the other side we have our body. We need to take care of our body. I have no doubt about this, and never would I say that the body is not important. But this third point for the balance is this central point of our scale. This is our mind, our inner state of being, like towards our surrounding, towards our body, towards the world, the way we live and we experience the world. What happens, and that's just a few words, is if living in a healthy environment with a healthy body and a sick mind, what is it going to create? The balance, there's no balance. It's like living in hell inside of paradise. Living in a difficult, if the body's sick, but the mind is healthy, it's possible to live as if we're in paradise, even being in hell. Because, I mean, we put energy into our surroundings, don't we? We try to avoid certain people. We want to be with others. We try to be in a comfortable place. We try to create conditions around us that are as favorable as possible. We take care of the body too, our body too, within the limits of our own abilities and knowledge. I mean, we're living more and more in a time where there's awareness of a healthy lifestyle, exercise, and diet. I mean, we give attention to all of this, but in reality, body and surroundings, this is just not enough. Because in the middle is our mind. When it's not stable itself, it's going to unbalance everything, go to one side or the other. We lose our center. As we try to take care of our body, we need to also take care of our mind. In the same way that we take care of our environment, our surroundings, we need to take care of our mind. Let's look at our body first. Our state of physical health, I think we all know, so our physical state, we can't change it from one moment to the next. I mean, we need to cultivate our health. The state of health is a fruit of our lifestyle. I need to eat in a certain way, but just doing a diet for 2 days is nothing. Is just taking up our energy. If you really want to cultivate a healthy body, you need constancy. You gradually cultivate that state of being, because our body is not something that just changes from one moment to the next. Sicknesses and states of health are both results of gradual processes. Our sicknesses don't just come out from one day to the next. There's something cultivated little by little, and when the symptom comes out, it means that there's been a long process that has just summed up, one thing after the other, and has brought this result. But the body is malleable, and the state that we find ourselves in is the result of many, many things done in the past, but it's also based on habits. So the more we repeat something, the more normal it becomes, the easier it becomes. An example that we can take, these days, for example, the Olympics have just finished. When we see an Olympic athlete, for someone to run that fast or do whatever that they do, I mean, how much energy and time did they have to invest to be able to do that? Could we do something similar? I mean, for me, sports is sports not for me, or I'm not for sports. Let's say I have a lot of respect, but I've never done any sports. But I'm sure that if I started training correctly every day, I don't think I'd become an Olympic athlete because I don't have the predisposition and I'm a little bit late to start. But I'd be able to do a lot. Today, after 100 meters, I feel tired. But if I train correctly with the right constancy, I'd be able to do something, because our body's made up of habits. And when there's a physical training, it's explained that to like high frequency training, one needs to train constantly because if you have to train every day, because if you stop one day, then you've lost basically like 4 days. Okay, one day you lose 2 days, 2 days you lose 4 days, or even more. I don't remember exactly, but it's crazy. That's why athletes, when they train, they can't just say, okay, I'm going to rest for the weekend. No, just resting for the weekend means throwing away 4 days. 4 days of training and having to invest a lot more energy after. So our body transforms and can transform in so many different ways depending on our lifestyle. Our mind is the same. But first of all, let's try to understand why we should take care of our mind. Let's see this. We have 2 types of suffering. There's physical suffering, pain, heat, cold, hunger, thirst. And then there's a mental suffering. Sadness, resentment, anxiety, fear, dissatisfaction, etc. If we asked ourselves, this simple question to ourselves, do I have more physical or mental suffering? What do you think you have? Physical or mental? Mental, no? One master of Lama Michel Rinpoche named NgalSo Rinpoche, once I was listening to teachings that he gave. I didn't have the opportunity to know him, but he was a very direct master. I was listening to these teachings, and he just said, there are 2 types of suffering, physical and mental. The poor people suffer mostly from poor people suffer from physical pain. Rich people suffer from mental pain. At the end of the day, they suffer the same. When there's a lot of physical pain, is there a lot of space to meditate? But when everything's fine. But we live in a context where our basic needs are covered. I'd say so. I mean, they're very well. We're satisfied. But there's still dissatisfaction. There's fear. There's anxiety. This reminds me of a time I was talking to somebody. It was someone who came to me. It was one of the richest people I had ever met. It was the owner of like banks, investment companies, and talking to me. He said, I'm in trouble. I don't even to think about the cost of something. I mean, anything that is for sale I can buy without even asking how much it costs. That's not a problem. I have a beautiful family. I'm in love with my wife, I have wonderful children, I'm really happy. Physically, I'm fine too. Practically, I can do more or less what I want to do, but I wake up in the middle of the night full of anxiety. There's an there's there's an there's a void of dissatisfaction that I don't even know how to fill. It's clear that when our material needs of our surroundings and our body, that they're covered, it's just not enough, because we, in reality, I mean, we have what we need. And even according to studies done by the United Nations, there's an annual report, or it's the report of world happiness, and they do a lot they do research to see how people are inside, their level of happiness. And I didn't read the whole report, just pieces of it. It was a long report. But at one point they did this, we did the research where they asked if money brought happiness or not. And the answer, the result, they did it all over the world. The answer, and I agree with, the answer is yes. Money brings happiness, but up to a certain point. This says that there's if you're under a certain limit, then you suffer more. But if you go past this limit, then it doesn't matter how much money you have; it's not going to change. But that starting point is if you don't have money for food, or you can't take care of your body, or if you don't have money to take care of the education of your children. In those cases, you would suffer more. But once your basic needs are covered, doesn't matter how much more money you have, the level of satisfaction and happiness does not increase. It's a little bit like saying, under this level, there's what you have or don't have makes a huge difference. Like if you don't have food to eat and you have a meal, that's going to make a huge difference. But once you have all your meals covered and you have shelter and can take care of your health, it doesn't matter how many meals you have or the quality of the food, your level of satisfaction is not going to increase. So what we see with this is we, in this context in which we live, and I don't know everybody well, but I imagine that we all have what we need materially speaking, even much more. We live in this crisis of superfluous, maybe the problem is we can't buy the cell phone that we would like to have, and I'm not saying that nobody has, that we're all without economic worries, but our basic needs are covered. If we just looked at what we need instead of what we want, that makes a big difference. But that's another subject. But the point is, we have more mental suffering than physical suffering, and there's an antidote. That always comes to my mind when I talk about this, and it was a rabbi who told me this story for the first time. But I've also seen an imam tell this story. So I don't know if it comes from Islam or if it's a Hebrew story, but it's not Buddhist at the origin. It talks talks about a man. But let's imagine ourselves. We're walking in a small city. Let's imagine like a little medieval Tuscan town, and like I think about San Gimignano or this kind of town where there are lots of small hills and there are hills and small streets. So imagine we get to the top of one of these hills. It's at nighttime. It's dark, and there's a lamp. There's a street light, and there's a man who's there who's desperately looking for something. And then we ask, "I'm sorry, what's going on? Can we help you?" And he answers, I've lost my keys to my house. I can't get into my house. It's a big problem." And okay, can we help you? Can we help you look for the keys? Yes, please help. And so there we start looking for the keys everywhere. We're doing everything to try to help him find the keys. And at that point, we ask, "But where did you lose these keys?" He says, "Oh, I lost the keys down there." "Well, then why are you looking up here?" Because here there's light, and down there there's no light. It's dark. So to look for something correctly, in the wrong place is useless. So following this logic, if we're hungry, should we meditate or eat? We should eat. If we're hungry, maybe it will distract us and we won't feel that our hunger, but then but for example, something could happen, like happened to me, like when I lived in India. Like I don't suffer so much from heat or cold or hunger. So I just didn't give it much attention, and I ended up having gastric problems. And I would, it developed an excess of like acid. Gastric acid, because I would drink too little and I wasn't listening to my body. But if I'm feeling hungry, I should eat. If I have a physical problem, I should go to the doctor. To see how I can face that physical problem. Because a physical problem if on a very simple, just to simplify, if I have a problem in my body, the solution is in my body. If I have an economic problem, the solution is in matter, by resolving this economic problem. So having a different attitude, will certainly help. But just in a few words, if I have a physical problem, a physical suffering, then the solution would be found in physical. If I have a mental suffering, if we're sad, for example, or full of anxiety, dissatisfaction, fear, where can I find the solution for mental suffering? Our tendency is, when we have mental suffering, is it to resolve the problem, or do we try to forget it? We try to forget the problem, but in reality, if I see that something's dirty and I put it under the rug and I don't see it anymore, I say, "Oh, wonderful." Does that mean that it's not there anymore, or is it just that I don't see it? No, I'm just not seeing it. So when we have mental suffering, the solution is going to be found in the mind. There are not many other possibilities. So what happens is once we have mental suffering, we should try to understand better what the dynamics are of this suffering. Where does the suffering come from, and what can we do to change it? Because we need to take care of our mind. It's one of the it's the most important, most powerful tool that we have in our lives. As we saw before, if the surroundings is healthy and the body is healthy, but if the mind is not healthy, then we suffer a lot. We're not balanced, and we are unbalanced. Instead, if I have a very adaptable center, and that can adapt to the imbalances on the sides. So maybe there's problems in my surroundings, but then I'm able to recenter, or my body is out of balance, but because my mind is centered, I find my balance. So we need to take care of our mind, as we saw before. Someone mentioned I was talking to a psychiatrist who's a friend of mine, and I'm not against medicine. Medicine. This doctor was a very classic doctor, allopathic doctor, and we had a long discussion, and the question was, who's in charge? Is it the body or the mind in charge? Because when we feel a certain feeling, there is a chemical aspect that comes out, but the conclusion in the end was, when there's a chemical imbalance, and that comes out as depression or anger or sadness, whatever the emotion is, there is also a physical component. But it's clear that if we're taking care only of our body, and we make like a cocktail of what we need for a happy mind, it's just not going to be able to sustain that situation. Instead, when there's an inner effort to create the right balance, then the mind can create that balance. If we think just short term, okay, I just take some antidepressant, for example, but maybe it'll work short term. But if we want something for mid, long term, we need something that's more sustainable, and this depends on our lifestyle. What's important here is that the most important tool that we have is our own mind. Doesn't matter what we want to do. We want to make a lot of money. What's the strongest tool? Just being born, be born rich, or have a strong, healthy mind with good intuition. Because being born with a lot of money doesn't guarantee happiness. I mean, how many times have we seen people who have very little, but they've been able to use their mind. They're very clever. They have a great sense of intuition, and they've been able to create a lot. So even on a material level, our mind is fundamental. It's the most important tool that we have. I mean, at work, what's your most important tool? It's your mind. Even if we were to to go, for example, to a company. So we ask, what's more important, or what creates more problems in a company, for the lack of technical knowledge or the lack of emotional balance in the workers and the employees? Because the problems, the difficulties that come at work, they're not for technical reasons. It's because one is jealous, one has a personality that's like this, and the other is like that, and it creates a lot of dynamics that we know. If we were to take people, I'd like to see on a CV, beyond what studies you've done. I'd like to see if you're able to problem solve, if you're balanced, if you're full of love and patience. You know, even if you're all those things, but you studied something different, then I can teach you the technical things. So, but being able to work well with others and learn even within a couple and within a family. I mean, how important is the mind with these relationships? When we talk about the conflicts in relationships, are they for material or physical things, or are they mental problems? Now, what I see is that these are problems that come from mental imbalances, or problems come from the mind. No matter where we go, the mind has has a fundamental importance. But in our education from our childhood to today, how often did we learn how to know the mind, how to direct the mind, how to cultivate a certain state of mind or another one? Very little. Unfortunately, we're used to thinking that we're used to the fact that our mental state of being is just a result of the world around us. That's what we think when we have anxiety or fear or any other emotional and their unhealthy mental state of suffering. And without philosophizing, if we ask why we're suffering, why are we feeling that thing, we usually blame the world around us, the situations around us, and not an inner attitude towards some external circumstances. But my point is our mind is the most important tool for happiness or for our suffering. But normally we don't give this value to the mind. Often we see our mind as being the result of the context in which we find ourselves, when instead our mind is the main actor. Just going to repeat it one more time because it's fundamental. We live our mental and emotional state of being as if our thoughts, our emotions were just the result of the context in which we find ourselves. Result of what others did or what others said, what happened, etc. The news we've read, what is going on in the world, the choices those around me are making, when instead it's the opposite. We live as if we are kind of a victim of the world. We're the victim of the world around us, when Buddha instead reminded us that I am my own protector, I am my own enemy. Let's try to understand this better. First of all, none of us, no one, is able to perceive or to live anything independently of himself. Is that clear? Anything that we live it through the filter of ourselves. So, how does our life experience come? Let's remember that life is made up of perceptions. It's made up of through our 6 senses, our 5 senses of our our 5 senses plus our sense of our mind and our memories, our judgments, etc. So we live through our senses. We're not able to perceive without our senses. So let's take the example of sound. We hear the sound without philosophizing, without analyzing. And I ask you, are you all able to hear this sound? Yes, we heard this. We heard the sound. But if I ask you, are you all listening? Are you all hearing the same sound? Without philosophy. And you say yes. If someone says no, well, okay, how many different sounds do we have? No, it's the same one. Oh, but okay. Without philosophizing, in Tibetan we say without analyzing. I mean, the sound that we hear is just one. But now let's analyze. Let's try to get into the details of how this comes about. Our perception of reality comes through something called contact. It's rekpa in Tibetan. It's contact made up of 3 parts. We have a sensory object, and in this case, the sensory object is sound. What sound? It's vibration in the air. So what happens, this sensory object, it comes together with the sense power. The sense power is our physical hearing. This comes together with the sense consciousness that's part of our brain, our mind, call it what you want, that takes the signals that come from the sense power and transforms it to an inner state. So here it says now this is sound that you're perceiving. And there's a 4th point called discernment, where we say this is this sound of a bell or a sound of something else. This vibration in the air that comes to each one of us, it's not the same. Depending on where you're seated, the sound reflects, differently and gets to each person differently. So the way the sound comes to each one is different, and also the sense power. Our physical hearing, is it the same? Does everyone have the same hearing? We don't hear all the same frequencies. Once someone explained something to me that made me reflect between children, adolescents, adults, and elderly. I mean, we hear different frequencies. There are some frequency, for example, that after a certain age you don't hear them anymore. And there are actually stores that don't want children or adolescents hanging out in their stores, and they have a machine that can actually emit a certain frequency that disturbs adolescents and children. but not to adults. So if an adolescent goes into that store, they wouldn't want to stay in there. They would want to leave. That means when we hear something and someone hears, and someone is next to us and they hear the same sound, we expect that we're listening to the same thing, but our sense powers are different. I mean, some people are very, very sensitive to sound. Others, you can yell and they hardly hear. Even just think of other forms of life. Animals hear sounds differently than we do. So our sense power is different, but it's not obvious. Just remember that that the actual sense object is different. Remember that the sense power is different, and also the sense consciousness is different. So one is more aware. One is less. Or there are times maybe the person's even distracted, and so it's as if that person doesn't even hear it. How many times does it happen? Someone's talking to us and we're distracted, and it's as if we didn't hear it, or something is shown to us and we're distracted. It's like not seeing it. So the point is that everyone's reality is different here. So let's go back to the example of the sound of the bell. So what comes to our ear is just a sound. But when we hear the sound, what do? Do we just leave it, or do we give it a name? We give it a name. We attribute a meaning. And together with this meaning, there's so many aspects that come together. It's beautiful sound. It's unpleasant sound. It shouldn't be there. It should be there. I mean, there's so many things that we attribute to this sound. So every time there's contact, inevitably there's feeling. When I have a physical feeling, it's going to bring me a physical feeling. When it's going to be a mental feeling, a mental sensation. So let's look for a mental, it's a physical feeling of suffering. So it's a physical suffering, for example, a frequency that is too high for our body. So we're going to connect that sound with a positive or negative experience. There are maybe even neutral sounds, but what happens is, we then say, oh, this sound shouldn't be here. It's bothersome because we're here together. We don't want there to be other noises. So, why is there that noise? So that generates anxiety, or we don't want it to be there anymore. I mean, it generates a certain amount of suffering. So there are two objects. There's a physical object, but there's also a mental object. If we take the sound of the construction work outside, the suffering is mental. It's bothersome because I'm here. I am here, and I'm responsible for the center. I'm responsible for the people. I don't want people to be bothered. I want people to be, relaxed. But just listen to that sound with a neutral mind. It's something we wouldn't say it pleasant, but most of our experience are based on the value that's given, and more on the value that's given than the actual contact with that object. So what happens is that when we find ourselves with any situation. We're just not able to experience anything independently from the value that we give to it. We're not able to not attribute a value or a meaning to anything. So in every moment we're living that situation, we perceive that object through our senses and also through the value that we're attributing to it. So everything is lived through this filter of self. And this value that we attribute, within that, we have our past experiences, our accumulated traumas, our social cultural context in which we were raised. It's very often what happens is this. Let's see how I can explain this well. During our lifetime, since our birth, we have many experiences. And at the beginning of our life, our tendency is to learn, is to know. When we see a small child, maybe even a baby who's just, in this first months, we say, oh, this, is not doing anything. But in reality, it's doing so much, and it's the most important time in his life, because when we're very small, we are learning to know. We're knowing, we're having our first experiences. When they're repeated, when a similar experience is repeated, we see that previous experience and we say, oh, it's the same thing. So we recognize, we know. If I drink water and I feel pain, I'm going to connect water with pain. So if that happens twice, the third time I'm not going to want water. Then maybe over time I can learn that the suffering came from something else. But maybe years and years later, when I get close to water, I feel anxiety because those first times that I drank water, I felt pain, and I don't want to feel pain. So from the first moments of life, first years of life, and up to today, we have many experiences that we live well and others that we don't. There's situations that when we find ourselves in a certain situation where we feel suffering, and we get this kind of aversion. There are wounds, there are the traumas, they were full of these, doesn't have these traumas or wounds, I mean, from my fortune, I've met people also who are incredibly balanced and healthy, but I can count them in my hands. Because in interacting in life, it's normal that one does something and hurts somebody else. So, we just don't know how to react. I mean, it's just normal to accumulate these tensions during our life. So what happens is we create these wounds, these unresolved situations, feelings. So I take water and I feel pain 1, 2, 3 times, so I don't trust water anymore. But then I need to be with the water, but every time I'm in front of water, what happens? It reminds me of that experience of pain that I had. So when I'm in front of water, it's as if there's something that comes inside and it just resonates, that experience of suffering. And then whenever I'm in front of water, I connect it with the feeling of pain. So I've seen this in myself. Because it's some experiences that were very, very difficult to face. That not everyday kind of situations, but I lived them very harmoniously. They weren't situations that created any kind of tension or malaise or suffering. It's them peacefully without suffering. But they weren't easy situations, but I didn't suffer. I was fine. In the same period, I lived other situations I went to look and I said, what's going on here? And what I realized is that when I found myself in front of when I find this conflicts, wounds, I lived that situation badly. Instead, when I find myself in front of a situation, regardless of how difficult it is, but doesn't find anything unbalanced inside me that could resonate, I just live it harmoniously. Is that clear? This shows us that when we live a situation with suffering, our suffering is not caused by the unresolved, some kind of wound, some kind of pain inside of us that that just brings about this suffering. So what happens? Normally we're just not aware of this, and what we try to do is to remove ourselves from these situations that we think our issues are, and try to face them. What I've seen is that every time I've tried to change an external situation where I wasn't well, I would change it with a lot of effort, and then that would be resolved, and then I would be back to the beginning with a different name, a different color, a different form, in a different context. But I found myself right back to the starting point until you can really see that the problem is not a need. So help me. I need to look at this so that I can change something inside me, so that I don't just keep repeating the same dynamics. The questions, if the wounds that we have, do they come from outside or are they inside? Because no one can hurt us if we do not allow them to. What does this mean? It would require an inner, a very high, a great inner maturity that most of us don't have. So ultimate analysis, we create our wounds, but most of us, we are not at this level of inner maturity, and so what happens is that we create our wounds in front of when we're in certain situations. I find myself in a certain situation and I get hurt. The wound was created, but how can I now? How can I? So the wound is, whatever experience that was, okay, that experience has finished, but I still has stayed with me. So then we'll see how to face this. But the point that I'm trying, we are not, just look at the present moment. We'll determine the mind. We started talking about the importance of our surroundings, the importance of our body, but if I feel the fear stays with me in my mind. They did a study, for example, in those who don't, and one of the main differences that they found between them with more experienced meditators is that one explained waves, and they were looking at pain. They gave them a kind of something bothersome and painful, like a shock or something. So So the first moment there's pain and one's not well, and then every once in a while they would repeat that pain, and they realized that people who didn't have the habit of meditating, the pain, there was like a peak of the pain even before one started suffering before, and then there was the moment of pain. It was like the peak, and then that pain continued as if that pain, that experience of pain started before the actual pain, and then lasted even longer, like a mountain basically. The more expert meditators, they realized that the peak of pain was the same, but but there was no pre-suffering and there was no post-suffering. It was just straight up. That means if we look in our own life, at our own suffering, how much of our suffering actually has to do with the present moment and how much has to do with the past or the future. Most of the time, our mental suffering has to do with what has been or what might come. So just joking around, I say that we spend a lot more time post-suffering and pre-suffering than actually suffering. So our mind is made up of habits. Our mind works with repetition. It functions with habits. Even our pain, even our wounds, even our conditionings like fear and anger and kindness and love, these are habits. Imagine the body that to go to the Olympics, one needs to do the exercise. The more often you do that exercise, the more you train, the easier it becomes. The mind is identical, as Shantideva said in the Bodhisattva Charvatara, this very important text. There's nothing that is not easy once you're used to it. Our mind is made up of habits. The more we repeat something, the more we repeat doing something, thinking something, feeling something, the easier it is to do it. So now, today, most of us, we live our emotions, our mental inner states. Also, just going to open and close parentheses. The word emotion is, in Tibetan, the word doesn't exist. We have mind, thought, mental states, but the word emotion doesn't exist. Even in the West, it's quite new, this word emotion. But today it's something that is quite used. So any inner state of being of our mind, or whether it's love or fear or anger, satisfaction, joy, these are habits. They're habits that we create. The more I complain, the more I will complain. The more I feel dissatisfaction, the more dissatisfied I will feel. The more angry I get, the angrier I will get. Our mind is made up of habits, but most of us are just not aware of this, and we live our inner states of being as if they were the result of the context in which we find ourselves, and we spend our lives trying to change our surroundings, our context. I don't know if that's clear. Now, it's not easy to change our mind. It's not easy to change habits. It's hard to quit coffee. You can imagine how hard it is to stop getting angry. How can I stop drinking coffee? I don't drink coffee, so I don't know. But if there's a strong habit, it's difficult to change. And we're just made up of habits. Our habits, our habits were created in even our childhood. It's said that there are four characteristics, main characteristics that determine our state of being. The four are the following. They're called, in Tibetan, we have Rigi Gyunten, Lenke Gyunten, Nyonto Gyunten, and Chanto Gyunten. A part of what we are comes from our DNA. There's a part of our personality characteristics that come from our parents, our ancestors, etc. There are many modern studies that show us that there are even traumas that are passed down from influenced by experience that example that you can find in people that are very common. People, like if their parents or if their parents or grandparents experienced some kind of suffering, like a rape, even in the animals, the animals have an instinct to have fear of some animals or situations, even if they've never seen that. So to use a modern term, let's say there's a genetic component to our being. So in Tibetan, Rik, which means family, Gyu is lineage, continuation. So our familial lineage, is that influence our present moment. And in this present moment, there's not much you can do. You were born where you were born. The experiences of our parents and grandparents were what they were. You can face them to a certain point, but it's an aspect that influences us. There's another part of us that's called Lenke Gyunten, and these are characteristics that we all have that we bring from past lives of ours. And it's explained that these characteristics, these deep characteristics, of our personality, our way of being, these are the experiences that stayed on a very deep level. These actually go from life to life. So a great part of our way of being comes from when we were born. It's maybe traumas that come from past lives. So there's a part of us that comes from past lives. And then there are two other aspects, experiences that we've lived in this life. And the fourth point, Nyonto Gyunten, is the fourth one, are the knowledge that we have acquired. So what we are today is influenced by, apart from the genetics, from our experiences of past lives, and there's a part of comes from what we've learned, and then what we've also experienced. I don't know if that's clear. So put together, we are what we are. Is genetics something static, or is it something? Is epigenetics, for example, where scientifically it's been proven that a change in our lifestyle and the experiences that we do, it can actually transform our DNA, so even genetic level. So even if I'm born with a certain DNA, with a certain influence by my parents or grandparents, is not a condemnation. It's possible to change it. The deep habits that we take from life to life they're always change, absolutely impermanent, and can change. The experiences that we have and new experiences that we have changed, and also our knowledge can change as well. So when we find ourselves faced with a situation, the way we react to that situation, the way we live that situation is influenced by these four aspects. Now, how can we change one aspect or another? Ways of doing that are beneficial and others that are negative, are detrimental. And this is this starting point, is recognizing what's good for me and what's not. Let's take a very simple example. I mean, there's a habit I have there's a habit of rejoicing or of feeling gratitude, but then there's also a habit of criticizing and complaining. These are both habits. So the habit of complaining is like a little sickness that is a sickness. Even the mask wouldn't help. It's like if you start complaining, and then when you start complaining, it really just becomes quickly a habit. And the more I complain, the more I will complain. It's hard to stop. I've seen, for example, a situation where there's a person who was used to complaining a lot. And at a certain point, this person was in a context where everything was absolutely fine. It was everyone was wonderful. It was really it was a wonderful time in many aspects, but I saw the person that was uncomfortable. And the person was there, until the person found something to complain about and then relaxed. Because it's a habit. Sometimes even suffering becomes a habit. For example, complaining is a habit, and the more I complain, the more I will complain. And the more I complain, the more dissatisfied I am. This is clear. For example, I mean, it's very easy. It's a very easy subject, even if it's difficult for us to see. I mean, what determines the value of something? It's intrinsic attributes, or some kind of value that we give to it based on a comparison. Even in economics, for example, I mean, this bottle half filled with water, is it worth one or 10,000 or a million? It's a question of supply and demand. The higher the value is. So when we attribute we live it in one way, and we think it's worthless, we don't give that value, it just loses its value. Money, for example, is such an example of this. A few years ago in India, for example, the Prime Minister, without getting into the politics of it all, he went on national TV at 8 p.m. and he declared that at midnight, all 20 euros or more would be worthless, and they had one month to take them to the bank. And if you took your money to the bank, if you had rivers of money thrown away, and and if you were to put money into the bank without declaring where they came from, you would have to pay 200%. It was a chaos for days. But what's interesting is this, before that choice, before those words spoken, a banknote had a lot of value. And then cows eating money, because the garbage cans were just, the garbage was filled with money. So you have a piece of printed paper, what determines whether that has a value or not? I mean, just the common value that's attributed to it. So here we also find the example of the monkey and the grape and the cucumber, and I've told this story many times. What happens is the value of something depends on the value that we attributed to it. It's not an intrinsic value. So to complain or to rejoice or to thank doesn't depend on an objective external characteristic, but depends on an inner attitude. For example, dissatisfaction. How do you eliminate dissatisfaction? By getting every object of desire? An example, is to overcome one's own desire. Tame one's own desire. Again, Lakpala, my teacher, he taught me so much about this. One in this monastery, and it was relatively new. But for example, there was no shower in the bathroom. There was a faucet, and there was a bucket. So it wasn't great, technology to have a shower. So I said, okay, let me redo. Would go into the courtyard next door, where often the monks would sit around. So it meant that I couldn't take a shower during a different way. But as I did that, I said, well, why don't we do this? And then there's also that. And as I was doing this, Ken Lakpala, who had a monastery, remember there were 4,000 monks in this monastic university. It was quite large. And so I started seeing some things in the house. And then I started, so this living room basically united all of the rooms, but the windows were up high. So I said, Genla, we're going to change the windows. He said, why? I said, because when it rains hard, then we have water infiltration. And he says, what do we do when that happens? So we put buckets, we put pans and pots, how often does that happen? Well, 10, 15 times a year. So why do you want to change the windows? Is that so much work or difficult to There was also at the same period there was the dining room table. There was a table for 8, but only 4 could sit around it because its legs were half broken, and if it wasn't against 2 walls, it would fall. So I said, Genla, I want to buy a new table. Okay, it's fine for 4, but we can't bring it into the center of the room. He said, how often do we eat more than 4? Sometimes, a couple times a year. And he said, well, what do we do? We go into your room. He had a big room, like Tibetan style, with a bed that was also like a kind of couch with a table in front. And aren't we happy with those moments together? Yeah, we are. So well, why do you want to change that? So, and I can give you so many other examples. And one day he came to me and he said, you're restructuring your house. I'll help you in everything you want to do. But with one thing, just remember that there's no limit to your desires. So try to establish what you need and what you want. And I realized that the more I did, there was more to do. At a certain point, I saw that the walls weren't straight, that the light was like this, and that thing was like that, and I needed to do this, I needed to do that. And in the meantime, I saw that construction store, and I saw wood floors instead of linoleum, and I wanted to do this and then that. And the more I did, the more I wanted to do, the more. And once he said that to me, I realized something. I said, okay, enough. And at a certain point, I actually left something to do, because to remind myself that there's always something else to do. But what the the lesson, the main lesson he gave me related to satisfaction is that one day I brought him 2 pairs of socks from Italy as a gift. They were a very nice Bordeaux. Yeah, they were very, very nice. I mean, he would wake up every morning at 3 a.m. to do meditation, and then have his breakfast while he would listen to the news.